Welcome to Breaking Badness special book club episode with Tanya Janca, aka SheHacksPurple. She is the head of education and community at SemGrip and the author of the best-selling book Alice and Bob Learn Application Security, which we will be discussing today. Without further ado, welcome back, Tanya. This is your second time on the podcast. We're so excited to have you back.
Thank you so much for having me. Last time was so much fun. And yeah, I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah. Last time we got to talk, it was more about your background and your path within InfoSec, but I'm really excited. We're taking a deep dive into your first book. So for any newer listeners we have out there that didn't get a chance to listen to the first episode, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So I was a software developer for about 17 years and went to school for computer science and did all of those things. And then I switched over to the dark side, InfoSec, around maybe, I guess it's been about 11 years now. And I first became a pen tester. And then very quickly, I realized I'm not meant to be a pen tester. I am too impatient and too extroverted. I want to talk to everyone all the time. And so AppSec was the much better choice for me. And so I started doing that. And then I started speaking at conferences because I had no training budget, or I had a very tiny training budget made with Canadian dollars, which are very small compared to other countries' dollars. And so I started speaking at conferences so I could get in free. And that rolled into eventually me writing my first book, starting my own academy, being acquired, starting another academy, and then writing another book. Yeah, I've had a weird journey.
Cool. And in the introduction of that first book, like you had said how each piece of software is like a snowflake, unique by design. And I know talking and being extroverted was appealing about AppSec, but was that other element of it being a unique kind of snowflake thing, is that appealing to you as well in AppSec?
I loved building software, and the way I got into security was, so I also played music professionally, and I met a pen tester and he played music professionally, not really, anyway, for fun. And so our bands played together, and then he kept bugging me to switch over to security. And I was like, no, I love software. Software is the best. It's so fun. You build something out of nothing. You delight people when you present it to them because you're solving their problems and bringing them great joy. I'm just like, this job's very satisfying. And then you get to just crush problems. And I'm like, and it's like a trade, sort of, except you never get dirty and you don't get hurt unless you count carpal tunnel. So I'm like, this is great. This is the best job ever. No way. Mm-hmm. And so when I figured out, but I could switch over, but still do software. Right? Yeah. Like I still get to hang out with software developers all the time. I still get to work, and each project, like you said, is unique. So when you do like a vulnerability assessment scan on some infrastructure, you find the same crap over and over again because Windows Server 2012 Server Pack 2 is the same for you as it is for me. Whereas if you build a to-do app and I build a to-do app, they're going to be completely different. It's going to be this unique thing. And so every time you do a pen test or you do a security assessment or you do all the different steps to make sure the software is secure, it's, whoa, I didn't see that coming. That is completely from left field because it's a snowflake. And yeah, I find that each time, for me anyway, it feels different rather than when I was a pen tester and I just did a lot of scanning and I'm like, oh, look, you're missing this patch again.
Yeah.
For me,
yeah.
Just to be clear, I'm not insulting pen testers' work. It's very important work. And I'm so glad we have people more patient than me that are willing to do a good job because I was not great.
Yeah, but it's just not for you, and that's fine. Yeah, that's really cool. Is that why you decided to write Alice and Bob Learn Application Security? Just because something like that can come out of left field, like preparing people for the different things that could happen?
I actually wrote the first book because, so I started writing my blog because my colleague at Microsoft double dog dared me. And so obviously I had to. And he won our bet because I had more than 40 readers after writing 4 posts. So then I was like, I guess I'm going to keep writing. And I just loved writing. I'd been a songwriter before and I loved that, but I didn't think I would like writing a blog for some reason. I thought it would be really hard, but it turned out it's very cathartic to have a problem, solve the problem, and then write about it and share this idea with everyone.
Right.
It's not like writing a white paper, which I find difficult. Writing a blog, it's like free form. It's however you want. And if you want to put a silly picture of yourself in the middle or put a meme or make a joke, you're totally allowed. And after I'd written about maybe 20 blog posts, publishers started writing me and saying, you should write a book. And I was like, I don't know how to write a book. I don't even know how to write a blog. Go away. And then the person that became my publisher, Jim Minitel, wrote me and he said, let's just meet. And he's, so you know, there's no book about AppSec or how to do your job, right? You want more people to do your job. You don't want it to just be you and the 12 people. You want there to be a lot of people who are helping to secure applications. And he's, what if you wrote a book for you that helped you transition into your job? And I was like, oh, damn, that's such a good idea. That's so great. And this book for past Tanya, the book you wish that you'd had, so that instead of you having to do so many stupid things to try, like I write in the second book about my journey of all the things I did to try to learn. And it was just this most long, difficult, convoluted way to get there, right? And I'm like, what if there was a book? And so I wrote the book, people liked it. And then I opened my first academy and made this program to graduate AppSec professionals. And we ended up graduating a couple hundred. And for the first 2 years of the company, we also helped them find jobs. And we had something like a 98% placement rate. Yeah, within the first 90 days. Like people were just snapping them up. They weren't even done the 3 classes yet. And people were like, can we hire them now? And I'm like, make them finish. They need to know the whole story. And once we had quite a few of those, it was like, okay, so then we expanded the curriculum to other topics. But it was amazing to see someone that was a teacher or a nurse, or we have this one sort of famous student who only had high school, who was working in the middle of the ocean on an oil rig. And he's a full-time AppSec engineer now. And that's so amazing. And we met in person earlier this year for the first time. And it was just so exciting. Like, and now he's a senior AppSec professional. It's just like amazing. I'm a software architect, like a security architect. Isn't that wild? Yes.
It is wild, but so cool. Yeah. I had a couple follow-up questions from that. When you had just like did you say 12 readers initially or 20? Like, how did you promote your blog initially to find your readers? Was it purely social media or was there any kind of other outreach?
So when I was a musician, I read a book called Guerrilla Marketing for Musicians.
Oh my God, that's so cool.
And there was just all these weird things that you could do. And so if you do the same thing everyone else does, you're going to get the same results usually. I emailed lots of people I used to work with and said, I started a blog. You remember we talked about AppSec that one time? So like you might like this article. And then that would be one reader, right? And then some of them would tell someone else. And that helped. I told everyone at Microsoft, right, which was pretty amazing network. And so a bunch of them told people. I did use social media. I didn't have, so when I joined Microsoft, I think I had 400 followers. Yeah, not very many. But I was already speaking all over the world and had speaking invites everywhere. I didn't have a YouTube channel. I didn't know how to do anything yet. But I was like, what if I just apply the same music things that I did? And so I would just literally tell people all the time, like, I started a blog and I don't know if you want to learn more about AppSec, but here you go. And very quickly, people told people who told people. And I was like, oh, this worked. That didn't work. Mm-hmm. Like when I used to play a show, if I knew we hadn't sold enough tickets, I would literally just open up my phone book and call people. And I just phone people for 2 or 3 hours that I knew were fans. And I'm like, hey, what's up? Do you want a party today? And they'd be like, yeah, I'll come. Wow, you're calling me? I'm like, yeah, let's come on out. So I would just message people, and I still do that. So for instance, when I launched the SumGrep Academy for SumGrep, I wrote 600 people in my Twitter and was like, hey, so I opened a new academy and this time it's actually free. And so if you wanted to check it out or tell anyone, that would be like really cool. And I haven't asked for a favor in 3 years. So I don't know, hi. And then lots of them shared it with people. Maybe it was 400. I think it was 600 when I opened up SheHacksPurple. But I just took a few hours and just reached out to people that I thought might be interested or might say yes, if that makes sense. And so that is, a lot of people don't realize you already have people in your life that are really interested in what you do, like not just your mom, but other, like my mom will go read whatever thing I ask, but she doesn't have a whole bunch of people she's going to share it with. She is in her 70s. However, there's probably a lot of people you work with or used to work with who are probably super interested in the thing you do. So for instance, if you were going to speak at a conference for the first time, once the reporting's done, you could send it to some people that you know weren't there and be like, hey, like I just did this and I'm like pretty excited about it in case you want to see.
Yeah.
And you're not forcing anyone to watch it, but people do this with me all the time. They're like, I was on my first podcast. I'm like, oh my gosh, send it to me. Because it's exciting and their excitement makes me
Yeah.
excited.
Can your
Yeah.
mom like develop software now because of your
No,
book?
she so can't. But she did read chapters like 1 and 2, and then I think like chapter 10 and 9 and 10 of the last book, because she still doesn't use a password manager though, no matter what I do. Same with my dad. I try, but my mom uses Signal though, and my dad's, I'm uninstalling Signal again. Is asking me for my PIN. I refuse to do a PIN. I'm like, Dad, just give it to my sister and she'll put it in for you. And just because I live far from my parents, so I can't just do it for him. But anyway, I'm trying. And it's demanding a donation. I'm like, I'll donate for you, Dad. It's okay. Just click not now. And he's, no, it keeps asking. I'm like, because you have to click not now.
Oh, I love Signal. I'm a convert from this year. Like it's the best.
Oh yeah, when I was single and dating and anyone wanted to message me, I'm just like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't do text, I only do Signal. And so it's just, I made lots of new users.
Oh, yeah. That's a great idea. We need, for the safety of the singles out there, I think maybe that's a good idea.
Whenever I like work with professionals or whatever, like I was selling my house before a while ago and they wanted me to message them. They're like, can you take a picture of your driver's license? And I'm like, not unless we're using Signal. Like, I'm just not willing to do these things unless we're going to use secure channels. And I was talking to a CISO recently because when I travel, I meet up with lots of people in my network and she's super brilliant and awesome and amazing. And she's like, do you want to use Telegraph? I'm like, no, that guy got arrested. And then she's, I know. And then she's, what about WhatsApp? I'm like, no, Zuckerberg may not read my messages. I'm like, listen, we should use Signal. She's, I don't have Signal. I don't want to install anything. I'm like, I guess we'll never be able to speak. So I'm like, we are now at an impasse, but we did manage to have dinner anyway.
Oh, good. Like carrier pigeon.
I am still trying to talk her into Signal. Also, like I travel a lot. And if you send messages over data, it's free. If you send me a text, because I'm from Canada, it's going to be $1, right? And then $1 for me and $1 for you. And then it goes back and forth. And then before you know it, we spent $20 trying to make dinner plans that we could have spent on dessert.
I think you've got a great marketing mind, Tanya.
Oh, yeah. I want everyone to use Signal so they can talk to me.
That is like the messaging that I think would resonate with a lot of people is like, we could have had dessert for this.
I know. I should totally make a video because right now Signal's doing fundraising and I should just be like, everyone, you should donate to Signal so that you can afford dessert later.
Yes. Perfect. So shifting back to the book. Oh, my other question regarding the book was the publisher that contacted you. Would you say that they're more of like a technology house where they're looking for people that are writing to software and cybersecurity and things like that? And that's how they found you?
Wiley's very cybersecurity specific. And so my next book is security still, but also software development. So I'm a little outside of their wheelhouse, but we still get along great. And there's still lots of security. We'll talk about that later. But generally, they mostly just publish cybersecurity books from what I understand. They have been so great. If you publish a book one day, you should totally talk to them.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to publish a book one day. I don't know if I'll get to that level.
I don't know. I didn't think I would either. And here I am with like finishing my second book. When I finished my first book, I'm like, I am never doing that again. That was so hard. And then a year later, I'm like, I want to write another book. And my partner's like, excuse me, what did you just say? What? Is this Tanya or someone else?
Did the process for writing your first book take a year or was it longer?
It took about 1 year to decide what to write about, plan out the entire book, and do quite a bit of research. Then it took about maybe 6 or 7 months to write. And then it took maybe 6 more months, like for a total of 2 years, to do edits. Edits were really hard on the first book. I had different editors than the second book who were very strict with me. And I chose them so that I would be like technically correct, right? And in the first book, I have had 0 technical corrections in the entire textbook, which is really unheard of. And female technical authors tend to get a lot more flack than male authors. And so for no one to be able to pick a single thing as incorrect in the entire book is really impressive. But it was also very hard on the self-esteem at some points. And so the second book, I got different technical editors who were much gentler, but we'll see if together we've made an error somewhere, right? If one of us missed something. Because sometimes like I would reread it for the fourth time and I'm like, is this really true? And then I'd go research the thing again because I want to give the best advice I can.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But the second book took almost 3 years because of when I agreed to write it, I was in an acquisition process for my company, but then I joined the new company. It didn't work out and the whole acquisition fell apart. And that took 7 or 8 months. And it was just so stressful for all of us. Even if you're all polite and professional, it's still, oh shit, this is so not working. And then to professionally separate in a respectful manner takes a lot longer than you would realize. If you're just jerks, it can be a lot faster, but you want to do right. And then my company, I bought back my little percentage I had sold, and then I'm like running my company again and then relaunching it essentially. And that took a bunch of effort. And then the first week I started getting offers to buy it again. And then I spent 6 months negotiating with numerous companies that resulted in a bidding war for a month. And then finally SemGrep bought my company. I was just like, oh my gosh, whoa, this is a very exciting year and a half. And then I was like, okay, now I need to write my book. Like I need to settle down and write my book. But I was writing like a little bit throughout that. I think I wrote the first third of the book during that time, but I wrote the second 2/3 of the book over the past. I wrote a lot of it since July of this year. Like I was just like, I'm going to write every moment of every day until this book is done. Because my publishers, are we still doing this? It's hard to tell. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? I think I should do it. Let's do this. And they're like, okay, let's go. Let's set a schedule and then let's keep the schedule. And then we actually did. Because I had pushed it back so many times. Yeah, I'm hoping that my next few years of my life are slightly less exciting.
But you're such like a go person. I'm like already expecting you to be like, now we're on to the third one.
I'm working on that, if that makes any sense. Like 2 or 3 weeks ago, I got diagnosed with adult ADD. And that explains a lot of things in my life. And one of the things with adult ADD, especially for women, is that you say yes to everything. And then you end up really overwhelmed and stressed out. And I'm like, oh, I thought this was a flaw of my character. And they're like, no, it's like you want to so bad when you have ADD. It's so intoxicating to say yes. And so they're like, it's not your fault. I'm like, oh, I just always blamed me. So I'm going to see about trying to be a little more realistic. So I have a professional mentor who's been like coaching me on not saying yes to 100% of things. We'll see how it goes. It doesn't mean there won't be another book. It just means I'm going to make sure there's not 27 other projects at the same time.
Right. So in your first book, so in Alice and Bob Learn Application Security, you'd written that it's not something that universities and colleges teach. Like they're not necessarily teaching to write secure code. Would you say since that book's publication, there has been any movement toward change in colleges and universities, or what have you been seeing?
So there has been some change, which is wonderful, but not the amount of change I was hoping to see. So there are a bunch of universities that now have master's programs in cybersecurity. However, they do not teach secure coding or AppSec as part of them. And they still teach software engineering and software development, programming, like all the different types of things where you write lots of code. And none of them that I've seen or heard of are specifically a secure coding class in the curriculum. So a bunch of them have web app hacking, and by a bunch, 1 out of 100 universities or colleges will have a web app hacking course. And it is almost always taught by a human like you or I who works full-time in the industry and who is doing it as an adjunct professor getting paid about minimum wage or less. And it's basically a volunteer position and it's off the side of their desk, right? Like my friend Nicole Becker has taught at NYU for a zillion years. Like she'll teach 1 class per year and she's got 1,000 other projects going, but I think it's really important that we teach this. And I agree with her, but it's almost always web app hacking and or network security, which is still very important, but we're teaching them to code and it's still very insecure. And like the first lesson is still hello world. and they still teach you to say hello world to the screen, ask their name. They give you their name. You don't validate the input. Then you reflect it back onto the screen and say, hello, so and whatever their name is, which is the exact recipe for cross-site scripting. And we still teach it that way everywhere, as far as I'm aware. Like this has not been updated. And I wrote the first book thinking universities would pick it up. And I was super pumped. And all of them, so I spoke to many, and they're all like, yeah, you could totally come work here and teach it. And we'll pay you basically nothing. And then we'll own your intellectual property and we'll treat you like trash. And I'm like, oh, no, I don't want to work for Kelly. We're talking like 4,000 Canadian dollars for 4 months of work, and they own your intellectual property. We're talking 12 to 15 hours of teaching per week, plus the marking. And then you have the assignments. You have to, it's just ridiculous. And
do you at least get a hoodie or something?
yeah, it's just ridiculous. And so that's why I taught it for free on my YouTube channel. And so I'm going to teach the next one for free on my YouTube channel live again, and then save it for people that missed it. But I was very frustrated after reaching out to all the universities, and some of them are like, oh, we're starting a master's program and it could be in the master's program. And I'm like, that's great, but we have to teach them correctly from the very first time. And they're like, this book that you wrote is for cybersecurity professionals. It's not for software developers. So the second book is for software developers. So I'm hoping that I can have more arguments with staff from various universities and colleges to see if some of them will go along with my plan.
Like, why do you think there's like that resistance? Because like they go hand in hand, but people aren't recognizing it. Why do you think that is?
So I met with the dean for the computer science program that I went through, and he's a friend of a friend, which is why I went to the college in person and met with him. And he's, hey, it'd be really cool if you could do this. And I'm like, what's the pay? And he's, so it's $3,500. And I'm like, a week? And he's like, for the whole semester. And these are Canadian dollars. So that's 2,400 American, right? Like it's very little money. And I just started laughing, and he's, I know. And I'm like, so colleges don't make as much money in Canada as universities. So the universities in Canada, like some of them are extremely profitable, like Waterloo and McGill. They're really like internationally well known for their amazing computer science programs. So I'm like, what about y'all? But right? And I'm like, you could afford to pay industry prices. Like you don't have to pay me what an enterprise pays, but my gosh, you have to pay me what I would be paid to do AppSec each day. If I'm going to work 15 hours a week for you, you're not going to pay me $100. You're just not, maybe even 50. Like it was so little. It was less than $8 per hour when I worked it out. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? And all of them are like, adjunct professors get paid this. And so their argument, and this has been repeated to me over and over, no one from industry is willing to work with us. And I'm like, no, you're not willing to work with industry because you want to pay less than a living wage, right? And you're asking for experts in a very difficult field to come work for you, and you need to pay something somewhat reasonable. Imagine, Kelly, if people are learning to become an electrician at trade school and they're like, we're not going to teach any safety because no one will come in and work basically for free to teach it while we are making millions of dollars per year profit off the program. So I guess houses will just burn down. And I tried to explain it to them, and they're like, oh, there's these policies. I'm like, you make the policies. They're your policies. You can change them. That's literally how a policy works.
No, I remember that analogy from your book too. You that's actually in the intro of the book, is imagine if we didn't teach these safety standards over here, like how would that play out? And it's, yes, there would be more house fires. And I feel like if you don't teach secure code, like from the jump, like there's going to be fires later on.
There's no other areas of engineering. So if you look at civil engineering, they focus so much on safety, and I have so much respect for that. Like it is a huge part of every single project is safety. And I'm like, where'd that go for the computer engineers? They're just like, YOLO.
Is it just because you're not getting, they feel like the damage, it sounds, is just not, it's not physical damage like in a civil engineering realm would be a beam falls on somebody's head. Whereas they're like, oh, somebody's data gets stolen. They're not equating it to be the same thing, but it's just we need to shift. I don't know if we understand it, but other folks don't understand. It's also dangerous to lose this data.
I agree that if a bridge falls and 200 people die, that is a bigger tragedy than if one person's identity is stolen.
Yes.
However, we're having millions of people's identities stolen. Right? Like the Canadian Tax Office, the CRA, lost the identity information of hundreds of thousands of Canadians.
Mm-hmm.
And how is that damage not similar if in how much it affects people's lives? And like with the Ashley Madison breach, there were deaths, there were suicides and executions, right? And that's horrifying. And there are lots of, so a lot of gay people used Ashley Madison to hide themselves in countries where being gay is illegal. They were outed and people were executed. Yeah, like there were deaths because of that breach. And it's one of the first breaches that we know of where deaths happened. But there's lots of medical devices where they're implanted in someone's body. And there's all sorts of things where, so here's the thing is that most of the laws that say that you have to report a breach, it's only if it's a material breach that affects customers. And what does a material breach mean? It means something different to everyone.
Right.
I remember I was in a position where we had a breach and I immediately went to go report it to the Canadian Privacy Commissioner. And my boss's boss were like, whoa, Tanya, how is this material? Blah, 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 blah. And we had to have a lot of discussions about it before the decision was made. Because my first step was, I'm going to go do the thing. And they're just like, oh, woo, woo, woo. And they're like, it's going to look bad. I'm like, I think it'll look way worse if we don't. And so the Canadian Tax Office recently, it was discovered that there was something like 36 breaches that they did not report to the Canadian public that they should have, that are now considered material. And so they are in some hot water. And I'd rather them not be in hot water and have done the right thing. But I'm pointing it out because, one, I'm very upset with them because that is not okay. And because my parents were in one of those data breaches. And so I'm just like, my industry can't even protect my own parents? Come on, guys. And so there are tons and tons of breaches happening all the time where they're not considered material, or it's not the customer data that was breached, and therefore the public never hears about it. So we're only probably hearing about 1 in 50 breaches, if that, in my opinion. I've worked at places where it's, oh, we accidentally breached employee data, or we breached things that we don't consider customer data. We breached a bunch of, let's say, our things that we're training our AI on. And so that's not data that belongs to the customers. But then if we breached our model or something, that would still be a huge, gigantic loss that shareholders would really want to know about, right? I haven't actually worked somewhere where that's happened yet, but I've worked with some companies where that has happened. I feel like things are worse than the public knows, and I want it to be the opposite.
That actually brings me to a question that I had about your first book. And maybe you go into this into the second book, but another episode that we're going to do is the second book, is the idea of AI and training AI. That explosion really happened within the past year of ChatGPT and all of the other large language models. Like, how would that change how you wrote that first book? Or do you get into it more in the second book?
In the second book, I talk about how to develop securely and safely using AI.
Okay.
And I talk about a bunch of the very obvious risks that they should avoid. I don't get that much into AI in the book, mostly because I finished writing it months ago.
Right.
And then I took an AI course and I started building things with it and doing things after a bit. And so you only want to talk about what you're sure. However, I would have added some more basic guidelines of using AI safely to the first book, but they will be in the second book. However, I think one of the things that I'm hoping more people talk about is how to use AI to build way better code,
Right.
to build safer applications. So for instance, using it for threat modeling, using it to help you basically comment out your code, check your code to make sure you have the security controls you're supposed to. It's not as good as a static analysis tool yet. It still gives terrible secure coding advice. So I will actively use, I shouldn't name the model because I don't want to trash them, but I'll actively use AI, one of the big models, to make coding samples. I'll be like, make a sample that does this. And it's almost always insecure. And then I'll use that in my classes as, this is bad code. We just learned about this and this. Why is this bad? And then we walk through it and we talk about, this is missing, or this is in the wrong place, or whatever. And then I add my stuff to it. I'm like, this is better code. Why is it better? And then I'm like, this is the best code. Why is this the best code? Why is this code great? And we build it up together for various different vulnerabilities or defenses that we're talking about. But why can't they make the great code? So I'm hoping, so I took a class with this really super awesome dude named Jason Haddix, and he built all the
podcast.
He's cool. I like Jason quite a lot as a human, but also he's brilliant. And that's like a great combo. He's very nice. If you ever get to see him speak, he's actually a really great dude. Go say hi. And so he's built all these super cool bots with it. And then he talked about this thing called a RAG server, like RAG. And so I'm planning to build my own RAG server with like my books and all my research and all sorts of different other things. So, and what a RAG server is, the AI goes to it first and references that data. And that data is considered more correct than its previous learnings, and then have it build code. So someone did that already for OWASP with the OWASP wiki. And I'm like, oh, imagine if I could train it on like all sorts of things that I am excited about without breaking copyright. So I have to check and see if I'm allowed to train it on the OWASP wiki. Chances are they'll be like, yeah, we're OWASP, of course, but I'm going to check first.
Cool.
And then imagine being able to ask it and actually having it give you super fantastic, extremely secure code. Like that would be so exciting. I also want to get it to answer my LinkedIn messages. I love people on LinkedIn, but oh my gosh, so many messages and so much spam.
Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. Really quick. So when you mention like, this is not good code, this is better code, this is the best
Mhm.
code, is there such a thing as perfect code? Or is that kind of like pie in the sky thing?
Oh, so that's such a good question. So when we're doing an example, so let's say, so one of my trainings is about API security. And so we go through the OWASP API top 10, and one of them is broken, like 4 of them are broken access control. Really, if you read them and you pull it, I'm just like, oh, this is just access control, but at a different level. And so let's say we're doing the object level. So BOLA, broken object level access control. And so it's okay, so this is how we could access an object. And then it's what's wrong. And then we talk about what the defenses should be according to OWASP. And also, so usually I have 2 or 3 extra things I add on. And then often I'm like, this one's really strict because we're not going to do 12 defenses per thing. We can't afford that. So I'm like, I would do these 3 first and add this 4th one that's from Tanya's brain. And then here's other ones you can do if you work at a bank, for instance, or you're doing counterterrorism. You might need these extra ones, but for the rest of us, like, we're fine. If China is not paying super close attention to our specific system, like, we're going to be okay. But if China is paying a close attention to you, we need to have a meeting because they're amazing in good and bad ways. A lot of brilliant people over there.
Mhm.
And so we'll go through and just add various things until we have quite a few of them. And I'm like, I think this would be a realistic response, like of the code I would want for the average company that has this problem. And so that's what I would say the best code is. Now, is it perfect? If you have very advanced adversaries who are after you, there are many ways they can get in, but I don't want it to be through the apps that I help secure. I don't want it to be at all, but you know what I mean? I can only control what I can control. And so when I say best code, I'm like, this is the security posture that I would want from you. And I feel like a lot of security professionals, like when I first started, I was like, I need everything. And then I realized we're not going to spend $1 million securing an app that makes us 50K a year, unless it saves lives, unless it's uncovering terrorist plots, right? Unless there's a very good reason, a very special risk, a very special threat. Generally, the security can't cost more than the thing makes us, and it shouldn't be anywhere close to that price. And so talking about what realistic responses are, I think is really important too, especially so software developers understand why, because some of them are like, is that enough? And I explain why I think it's enough. But most of them are like, that's way too much. We should just do this one. And I'm like, here's how I'd get around this one. And they're like, You jerk. No, but it's true. Like, I'm like, so this defends this part. That's awesome. But what if someone comes like this or like that? Or and here's all these ways that they could accomplish that. And that's why we need these two other defenses. And they're just like, oh, this sucks. But usually training's a weird thing, Kelly, because when I worked in the government, we didn't have very much training. And so usually if you did training, you went off on your own and did a course and then came back.
Yeah.
And having dyslexia and then now finding out I have ADD as well, a lot of those things really didn't go that well for me. So I would usually just be like, I'm just going to read a bunch of books or attend some meetups or just work out things on my own, because a lot of the training courses didn't work for my learning style, which is fine. But now that I give training, so I'll go and we'll do the training and we'll talk about the things, and that's awesome. I give them like cheat sheets so they don't forget, etc. But then 6 months later, I'll get an email and it'll be like, this many things have changed since you left. Like the culture has improved in this way. Or I went into a meeting and I suggested that we add this layer of abstraction, and everyone's, oh yeah, we were planning on that. Like they're thinking about it and they're on board the train and they're interested. Versus before, it was like I felt like I was nails on the chalkboard when I wanted to talk about security, and it can help bridge the two teams together.
Wow.
And I didn't really know that when I started doing things like that, because I would take training and then I would come back and be very excited. But it never occurred to me, like, if everyone's all in the same room and you're discussing together the things that matter to you, that everyone's opinion can change together. I'm like, oh, that's powerful.
It's a movement. Like, speaking of ADHD, I have that as well. Dyslexia, yes. Dyslexia, I don't think I have that. But you had mentioned in our last conversation, you wrote Bob and Alice to different learning styles. There's different ways that you're sharing the information to speak to the different ways people learn. And I just wanted to grab like a brief explanation from you again. What are you doing and what has it accomplished? What have you seen success-wise from doing it in that way?
So this is such a great point. Thank you for bringing it up. So like I said, how some of the training classes didn't work for me. When I was 26, I started taking French classes in night school so that I could learn French, so I could move up in the Canadian government. And I kid you not, I got kicked out of night school from multiple schools because they're like, you're clearly not trying, which is a thing they say to dyslexic people a lot. When I was trying so hard, Kelly, I was literally almost to tears sometimes, like trying to study and trying to learn. But when you have dyslexia, yeah, I'm an adult and I'm paying out of pocket, spending my own time. Like, clearly I'm trying. But anyway, then I went to a special school. So there was one in Canada at the time for dyslexic adults to learn a second language. And it's a lady whose both kids were dyslexic who were struggling. And so they taught me 21 different learning styles. And I figured out which ones worked for me. And then I ended up actually graduating ahead of time with flying colors, passing all the exams with the top marks. And I remember one day I was leaving class and I was crossing the street and there was a man crossing the street and there were cars coming. And I started yelling at him, like, I'm like, oh my God, there's cars coming, get out of the way. And he stopped and he looked at me. I'm like, there's cars coming. Oh my God, you're going to get hit by a car. And then I realized I was screaming at him in French and I didn't even know. I'm like, les voitures, fais attention, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like yelling and it was just coming out of me naturally. And I'm like, wow, that. So then I was like, cars. And I like pointed and then he jumped off the street just in time. I think he might have not had perfect hearing. Okay. Or something. Like there was, because like I'm clearly like freaking out and he's standing in the middle of a busy street during rush hour. And this is obviously not a good place to have a conversation. Anyway, he was fine. In the book, I try really hard to cover as many different ways of learning as possible. And then that's actually one of the reasons why I also recorded an audiobook. And for the next one, I'm recording an audiobook. And then there's also a bunch of PDFs. And then I'm going to share cheat sheets, which are like short summaries that are pretty so that you can print them out and put them around your cubicle of, oh yeah, I'm doing input validation. I need to remember all the steps. Or, oh, I'm doing authentication authorization. I'm going to open up my desk and go get that. And I'm going to give those away on the internet to everyone if they'll join my little newsletter. Basically, I'm trying to do as many different things, like including the streams, so that as many people as possible can learn the way they specifically need to learn. And so apparently they told me as people get older, if they have not continued learning, what happens is they end up, it's more difficult for them to learn if there's been a very long time period where they weren't learning. And it's almost as though they have learning disabilities, especially by the time people are 40 or 50. And so there are a lot of people, because I was like 29, 30, 31 when I went to the school, and everyone was way older than me. And they're like, oh yeah, if someone's 50 and they just haven't been exercising their brain and learning, like exercising their brain in that way of learning, it doesn't work, and they need all of these extra assistance. And so whether you're learning disabled or not, it should be very easy to learn from this. And I try to do this with all the, like when I give talks, when I give training, when I write a blog, I try really hard to give as many different. So for instance, I explain the technical thing. I'm like, here are security headers. Here's the security header. Here's what it does. And here's how you configure it. And then I tell you a story later of how the security header saves the day. And then later, again, I'm like, here's this defense. And I'm like, but if you had this security header, you wouldn't need to worry about it because this, right? And as you hear it and then see it, and then hopefully do it, because there's a cheat sheet where you can copy and paste. I hope that then it becomes as effortless as possible. I also try to use humor and stories to connect in like a more emotional way, and also so that it's enjoyable, because if you're actually enjoying yourself, you'll read more. Right. So for instance, in the new book, I talk about polymorphism and like screwing up things with objects because it's really easy to screw up. And then I'm like explaining, so with polymorphism, you can call an object in different contexts, but with the same name, and it will behave differently. So for instance, when my mom says, Ms. Janca, did you not put your dishes in the dishwasher, Missy? But usually she just calls me Tanya, right? But it can emphasize the thing, but also make someone smile at the same time. And my mom's, oh my gosh, you're ridiculous. But it's true, right? And so you can call the same object in different ways. Polymorphism aside, being able to show things in ways people understand, like by talking about building a car or building a house, or in my new book, I talk about how I've only owned 2 cars in my whole life. I walked everywhere till I was 34. Because I lived in downtown Ottawa, and you just could walk or take the bus and it was fine. Yeah. But now I live in the middle of nowhere and I have to own a vehicle, or I will be a hermit, your call. And so I talk about one car, you can do anything you want with it. It was a Honda Fit out of warranty, and I can like scan it, and I can change the oil myself theoretically, etc. But then now I have an electronic vehicle where everything's abstracted away. You can't even see the engine anymore. And what that is like, and then talking about objects again, what that means. And I feel like everyone can understand when you give examples that, because everyone's been in a car in their life. Everyone's been in a car, and people know electronic cars are new, and they know lots abstracted away. And my cousin owns a Tesla, and she's want to see my engine, and she pops up the hood of the front of the car, and then there's just this open area and her purse is there. She's that's my engine. I keep my purse there. And this is it can be cute and fun, but also you completely get it. Yeah. Everyone's seen a car before. Everyone sat in a car. Everyone knows the difference between a motorcycle and a car. And I feel like there are so many super brilliant human beings in InfoSec, but not all of them know how to teach. And when I was learning, I sat in on many classes, and some of them were good, and I learned a lot. Like I took Adam Shostak's course last year, and I was like, wow, my brain exploded with knowledge. It was so great. But sometimes I've sat in courses where I've learned almost nothing, and they're going at a speed I can't keep up with, or they're bouncing around from topics and I can't keep them straight. And at the end, I'm just like, I feel like I could make a big mess, and that's all I've learned. And I'm hoping that over time, lots of people put more effort into the teaching of what they're doing rather than just being technically correct. I think it's really important. We work really hard to get the message across. And I don't know if you saw yet, but I'll send it to you after. I just made another silly parody music video about why you absolutely must have a pen test. And I dressed up like Amy Winehouse with the giant wig, and I'm ridiculous, and I'm singing and I'm dancing, I'm wiggling. I'm not a very good dancer. But the idea is there's all the dev objections. There's the reasons we need a pen test. Doing an automated scan isn't enough. And I make all these silly jokes and I'm ridiculous. And it's like another way I'm trying to reach people. Yeah. And I feel like we need to be more creative, especially with so no offense to marketers, I report to the marketing team, but we have a lot of marketers trying to reach us with messages, and a lot of those messages are biased.
Mhm.
right? And a lot of marketers are trying to educate. And to all of you, hats off, awesome job, good work. That's what we want, right? If we educate everyone, we build trust. When they need that product, hopefully they consider us, right? But there's a lot of not always like we're going to use fear, uncertainty, and doubt to try to scare you into buying their product, etc. Or they're like, yes, shift left means buy this automated scanning tool. It's as good as a pen test. It's the exact same. And I'm like, oh, lies. And so I feel like we have a lot of volume of messages. And cutting through is really hard, and educating with all of this noise around us is hard. And so I call upon other people that are trying to educate to be as creative as they know how. And I'm seeing really cool stuff like the Backdoors and Breaches game from Black
Yeah.
Hills Security. Awesome. There's lots of different games now. I made a silly game called AppSec Antics. It's like apples to apples, except for we make fun of security instead of people. It's like Cards Against Humanity, except for not completely offensive in every way. But I feel like there are some people being superbly creative, and I try to celebrate them whenever I can.
I love that. I think that's where I wanted to leave our conversation today, is like, that's such a beautiful note to end on. But before we exit, Alice and Bob Learn Secure Coding. When does that come out?
It comes out February 12th, or it starts shipping on February 12th.
Okay.
From various different places. And you can order it now. It's available on Amazon, on Wiley's site. If you go to SheHacksPurple.ca and click on books, I have a list. So no matter where you are in the world, you can get the book shipped to you. Because last time people were like, oh, Amazon's not shipping here. I'm like, I've got you. I've got this handled. I'm way more organized this time.
Perfect. And we are going to have you back to talk about Alice and Bob Learn Secure Coding. So we're going to talk about that at length. So thank you to our listeners for listening to this episode, but please come back, and Tanya's going to share her insights and some synopses of that second book. That's going to be so exciting. But thank you so much for joining us today. It's always such a pleasure talking to you.
Kelly, you're an utter pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And of course, you can get Alice and Bob Learn Application Security as a physical book, an audiobook. I personally got mine on Hoopla. I want to just promote that to folks out there, the library option. That's a good one. And of course, yes, you read that one too, which is very fun. So yes, we're looking very much forward to having you back again to talk about your second book. But thank you so much, Tanya. Bye-bye.
That's about all we have for this week. You can find us on Twitter @DomainTools. All of the articles mentioned today will be included in our blog post, which can be found at blog.domaintools.com. Catch us every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time when we publish our podcast and blog. That's it for this week. We'll see you again next week on another episode of Breaking Badness. Until then, remember, don't drink and click.